All right. Hi. So just a quick one here. I thought we'd just do a quick revision. Quick revision of quiz number 4. And by the way, thank you so much for the very thoughtful comments that you're sending through via the mailing list. Very, very nice. We should continue these conversations. I was a bit surprised here when I was going through some of the comments, people claiming that some of the questions that were covered in the quiz were not discussed in the lecture series, right? That's a bit strange. It turns out that the quiz itself is exclusively centered around computer software, right? And this is the other thing here, right? We should learn to appreciate the fact that part of what we are being assessed on is whether or not we understand concepts introduced to us, right? So there's nothing new here. I mean, this could just as well have been anything else other than the data lab, right? It's not like the question was centered around stuff that's done in the data lab. The question is centered around computer software, but contextualized within the confines of this small little project that we've been working towards as a lab, right? But that's besides the point. I thought before we revise the quiz, just kind of thought we would just show us some statistics associated with the course, right? Very disappointing, to be honest. Although it's a slight improvement from quiz number 1, right? So about 40% of the class, there's 26 out of the 67 that wrote the quiz actually passed, right? So these people got above 4.5. Yeah. Then if you look at the distribution, though, it's very sad, very sad. We had thought that computer software was probably going to be one of the simplest components that people, or the simplest topics that people are going to work towards here, right? I don't know. This is very worrying. Our worry is the people that fall or are falling within this class here, right? And especially the 22 that got D's there, right? A lot of ones were obtained by students here. But anyway, hopefully by the time we get to write quiz number 5, there'll be a slight improvement. We do suspect that there will be some slight improvement. Again, if you look at the distribution, not very inspiring at all. Not very inspiring at all. I mean, we have quite a few individuals that a number of you are falling within the 40 to 45% mark, but still our goal is always to at least ensure that we fall in between this cluster here, right? So the normal bell curve is actually supposed, what we expect or what we've been expecting is something similar to this here, right? So here's to hoping that very, very soon we'll actually get to shift this to the right. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through the quiz here. If I can get there. Ooh. Wow, if I can just get there, and I'm trying to get there. Wow, and I can't seem to get there. Okay. There we go. Okay, finally. Just have to open it from here, I guess. All right, so first things first, you always want to make sure, right, whenever you're writing an assessment, and it doesn't have to be, an assessment associated with ICT 1110. You always want to make sure that you thoroughly go through the question. And in this case, actually, an email and a Moodle announcement was sent through to you, emphasizing that you ensure that you read through the description. Because it turns out that all the questions were based on this particular description here, right? So question 1, assuming that you read through the description, question 1 was quite simple here. And these are randomized, so it's possible that your question 1 was different from what I'm looking at here, but that's besides the point anyway. You're supposed to indicate whether or not this statement was true, is is the data lab a cloud-based application? And the obvious answer here is yes, of course, this is true. Why? It's true because at some point here, uh, we mentioned that the data lab is hosted on, if I can just, the data lab is hosted on cloud, is hosted on the cloud service Heroku, right? So this essentially was the part that gave away the fact that the application itself is cloud-based, right? Something else that gave away the fact that the application is cloud-based is the fact that the backend itself, the database, MongoDB NoSQL database linked to the application, is also hosted on the cloud service MongoDB Atlas, right? So it's a cloud-based application, obviously. It's sitting somewhere out there in the cloud. And if you remember our discussion of cloud-based infrastructure during computer systems, we made mention of the fact that this whole notion of the cloud is centered around provision of either infrastructure or a platform within which you can deploy applications that you want to run. So if you remember the different types of the categories of this whole notion of cloud platforms is, I think, platform as a service, software as a service, and infrastructure as a service, right? So in this particular case, the data lab application itself is leveraging so-called platform as a service because we make use of the Heroku cloud service platform and of course MongoDB Atlas platform, right? And something else that you probably should have done for you to be able to, I guess, properly work through these questions is you should have gone to the data lab application itself so that you have a feel of exactly how it works, right? I don't know how many people went through this. A very basic application, really very simple application here, where it's just a crude application that allows you to add people or add things, add items to the database, view, edit, delete, and whatnot, right? All right. Second question was, which of the following types of software programs are you likely to find on GitHub? And again, the solution was hidden in here, right? We mentioned, there's a statement here that explicitly mentioned to say the source code used to implement the data lab application is available on GitHub, right? We are saying here that GitHub is a source code repository. And by the way, we had a discussion of GitHub here, right? We used it as an example in conjunction with other, if maybe we can pull up, in conjunction with other source code repositories that are available out there. I think this would be best done if we actually pull up the notes here. At least people start claiming that we didn't do this. And if we can get to the part where, right? If you remember, this is the part where we had a brief discussion of so-called GitHub, right? And if you need, you probably need to remind yourself of what we spoke about. You probably want to consume or to play back one of the lecture screencasts that was shared, right? But irrespective of that, I mean, it turns out that there are a number of source code repositories that are available out there, right? Again, if you were smart enough, you could, Jesus, this thing is, I guess it's because I wonder why this is happening. I guess it's because I have to reopen this. Again, if you wanted to thoroughly gain a sense of what exactly we're talking about when we made mention of the fact that this was a cloud, the source code associated with the data lab app was hosted in GitHub, is you could just as well have easily gone to GitHub, right? There's a link here that was provided. Yeah, it's saying the data lab app is available on GitHub, a source code repository. So what you should have done is you should have gone to 4 and 5 to gain a sense of what exactly was being discussed here, right? So If you go to, I have no idea what's happening to this machine here. If you go to GitHub, frozen. If we go to GitHub, I wonder why that's happening. If you go to GitHub and you go to that link, you should be able to gain a sense of what GitHub is all about, right? So this is what we're talking about here. Right, so question was, which of the following types of software programs are you likely to find on GitHub? And the answer, it turns out, is all of these different types of applications. Remember, the giveaway thing here is we are saying that GitHub is a source code repository platform. What that means is it's a platform, or it's a repository platform that is used to host source code, essentially. And all of these things here, all of these solutions here are associated with source code, right? It really doesn't matter whether the type of software you're dealing with is a language translator, whether it's a mobile application. All of these different types of applications are associated with source code, right? Somebody had to sit down and write down that piece of software. And it turns out that when you go on GitHub, really, you actually, and maybe we can just see if we can access Node.js, you actually are able to download. Just have to use you can download the binaries associated with the software. If it's an open source piece of software, you can, Jesus Christ, Node.js, GitHub. If it's open source software, you can actually gain access to the source code itself, right? So in this case, if we go to Node.js here, you notice that one of the things that this is the source code, but one of the things we should have access to is a download section right within here. So we can download the software from within GitHub, right? So it turns out that all of these solutions were correct. And the way the marking was done, by the way, is if you notice here, this question was out of 2, and you get a mark for each correct solution, right? So if it's out of 2 and we have a total of 8 questions, then what we're saying is each question is worth a quarter, right? Or 0.25. So you got a mark for each correct solution that you specified. Hopefully that makes sense. Should be straightforward really here. The Data Lab app has an API. Of course it has an API, right? And there's a giveaway statement in here as well. If you thoroughly went through this, we did make mention of the fact somewhere in the statement that the Data Lab application is accessible online and has a feature that enables other applications to interact with it programmatically, right? Explicitly, or rather implicitly, signaling the fact that it has an API associated with it. Better yet, what you could have done is you could just as well easily have gone to, if I can just get there. Jesus Christ. Anyway, you could just as well have easily gone to the application itself, which is here, and you'd have noticed that on the landing page of the application itself, there is a link, right, that is tagged as API. If I can just click this link, I don't know what's happening to my computer today. There's a link, right, and that link takes you to the API associated with the application itself. So the answer is, yeah, API endpoint. So the answer is yes, it's through this application has an API. And then for each of the following software applications, select the category or subcategory of software they fall under. Again, you notice that this question was associated with 3 marks. The 3 marks was evenly distributed amongst these 6 questions, right? So 3 by 6. Each mark, each correct solution was associated with 0.5 marks. Bootstrap. Right? Again, these things, Bootstrap is a software library. How do we know it's a software library? In this statement, we explicitly stated here that in order to quickly develop the application, the following frameworks were utilized. the following frameworks were utilized here, implying that Express.js, Mongoose, and Bootstrap are software libraries because they were used as part of the development process of this piece of application. This is not hard. It's a no-brainer here, right? So Bootstrap is a software library. Mongoose is a software library. Now, maybe the MongoDB part would have been a bit tricky here. But if you did a bit of searching, you did have access to the internet, obviously. You could have realized that MongoDB is actually nothing more than a desktop application, right? And then what else is there? Node.js. Node.js is a language translator. Why is it a language translator? Somewhere in the statement, we made mention of the fact that, there we go, in order for the application to successfully function, the following components are required. Node.js runtime environment. Right? The fact that you need a runtime environment for you to be able to execute this particular program means that, of course, it means that particular piece of the language used to implement the program itself is interpreted, obviously. But the runtime environment is there to translate the source code associated with the application itself into a form that a computer will be able to understand, right? So Node.js is a language translator, runtime environment, language translator, right? Not so hard. Express.js, obviously similar to Bootstrap and Mongoose, is a software library. And the Data Lab app itself is a web-based application. Easy stuff, right? And then question number 5, which of the following categories of languages can potentially be used to implement applications similar to the Data Lab application? And this is more or less like a trick question. Again, these are 6, each correct response was associated with half a mark, right? So you are required to select all solutions that applied, right? So which of the following categories of programming languages could potentially be used to implement applications similar to Data Lab application? Now, if you really seriously went through the lecture notes and if you played back the offline screencasts that were shared, you realize that this whole notion of programming languages is nothing more than an implicit description of the relative level of abstraction. High-level programming language abstracts the native machine code slightly more than a low-level programming language. So it really doesn't matter what sort of language you work with. You could pretty much easily implement any piece of software using machine code if you wanted to. And we went through this when we discussed this at lecture series number 2, right? When we looked at history of computing, we said that first-generation computers were actually implemented using machine code, right? So it really, in fact, very soon we will go through a process where we get to experiment with assembly language programs, right? Assembly language programs that are pretty much able to do exactly what these high-level programs do. So all of these apply. You could pretty much use all of these different categories of programming languages to implement web applications similar to the Data Lab application. All right. Okay. What is the last question here was, which of the following language translators would most likely be associated with the language used to implement the Data Lab application? This is a no-brainer. We said that this application requires a runtime environment, right? Remember the distinction between an interpreted language and a compiled language? A compiled language has an executable file as output. An interpreted language would require that you have an interpreter deployed alongside the source code so that the interpreter is used to translate the source code into a form a machine is able to understand. Right? It's here. Because you need the Node.js runtime environment, obviously the language used to implement the Data Lab application is interpreted. Now granted, I mean there's a couple of different technologies that were used here, but that's besides the point. A bit of HTML on the front end. There's a bit of HTML, I guess, for the most part anyway. But most of the stuff was written using JavaScript, right? All right. So hopefully this short walkthrough of the solutions is going to be helpful as you are revising. Again, I thought it was very disturbing that some people seem to suggest that the question itself had nothing to do with the lecture notes. When everything, this is to do with software. I mean, if we spent, how many hours did we spend discussing computer software? I don't know how many, but it's clearly a lot of hours here, right? 150 plus slides, those complimentary notes that were given out. The goal, once we cover a particular topic, is for you to be able to fully understand what that topic is all about. And as far as we are concerned here, everybody in class has gotten to a stage where they thoroughly understand what computer software is all about. And if you understand what computer software is all about, it really doesn't matter how the question is framed. You should be able to answer the question, right? Now, if you were thinking that the way the questions were going to be phrased was define a language translator, you're mistaken, right? We're not in grade 1 here, right? There's nothing like rote learning associated with ICT 1110. So you want to make sure that you fully understand these things. And again, as I always say, practice. Those things that you see in the slides, the screenshots that you find in the slides, they are with the corresponding URLs. They are meant to enable you go out there and read up more, research more on those things, and also work through the lab sessions, right? All right, great. I should be sharing lecture series number 6 within the course of next week. Enjoy and take care.